Grandma, first, why don't you introduce yourself? Because no one who's watching this knows who you are.
Okay, I'm Margaret Dailey, Witni Dailey's grandma, among 8 other grandkids I've got.
A bunch of great grandkids.
Yeah, and a bunch of great grandkids.
So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Here's the very first one. Tell me a story about your first memory.
My first memory was I was in the hospital. I had an acute case of nephrotic syndrome, and my first memory of it is this: around the top of the border of the room there were ducks walking around the top of the room, and ducks on my mother's head. A halo of ducks. And in that same thing, there was the nurses put Limburger cheese in the doctor's pocket, and he sat on it. And then when I got home from the hospital, one of the neighbors brought me a new coat. That's some of my first memories.
So how old were you?
About 6.
Was the Limburger cheese thing real?
Oh yeah, it
but
was.
But the ducks weren't real, were they?
No, the ducks weren't real. But the Limburger cheese and the coat were real.
Share some descriptions or stories about being a kid or a preteen in your family.
Oh, okay. We lived on a farm, and we were playing hide and seek one day, and my brother George, who was about 4 years old, came up missing, and we couldn't find him, and we looked all over the farm and in the creeks and every place else. When we finally found him 3 or 4 hours later, he came crawling out of the chicken coop. He'd fallen asleep in the chicken coop while we were having this. And picking blackberries. I remember we picked blackberries a lot, and my dad would wash the jars, and my mother would can the blackberries, but Dad would sit on his foot and he'd sing "I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen," as he washed and rinsed the jars.
How does that go?
How'd that? I'll take you home again, Kathleen, across the oceans wide and blue, to where your heart has never been since first you were my bonny bride. And I can't remember all the words to it, but that's part of it.
Yeah. Anything else you remember about being a kid or a preteen?
Well,
a big family?
Eileen. This one time, Eileen and I wanted cake, and Mama made these what you call quick cakes, and Eileen and I wanted cakes, and there was only one piece of cake, so Mama told Eileen, said, "Let Margaret have it because she's been sick, and I'm going to bake another one. You can have part of it." Well, Eileen started crying. Nobody loved her. She was leaving home. So then every time I could catch her by herself, I'd start singing. What's that song? Can't remember the name of the song that I'd sing to her. Something that she was leaving. I was kind of on the ornery side.
I wouldn't believe that.
Really?
What did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a kid?
I wanted to be a volleyball coach. I was going to go to college. My aunt and uncle were going to pay my way through college, and I was going to come out, to physical ed coach. And volleyball, I loved volleyball. I lived and breathed it. I was captain in my junior year, and co-captain in my junior year, and captain in my senior year in volleyball. And like I said, that was something really I loved.
Tell me 2 stories about your life as a teenager.
Well, I got 3. My life as a teenager, we lived about a fourth of a mile from this grocery store, and this guy that owned the store was bald-headed. His name was Flemmy Estes, and I'd wait for the store to get full of people, and I'd run. He always wore a hat. And I'd run and grab Flemmy's hat, run around the pool table and holler, "Look, everybody, Fleming's bald-headed." And I'd take his hat outside and throw it up on top of the store, and he'd have to get a ladder to get his hat down. And it took him forever to catch on to hold on to his hat when I came. And then there was a neighbor named Mr. Poole, and there was this kind of a fence between our yard and his tobacco field, and you couldn't see over it. And he'd be out there plowing his horse, and I'd get out and squat down behind the fence and holler, "Whoa!" And that horse would stop. He'd cuss that horse and get it to going again, and I'd let it walk about 10 steps, and I'd say, "Whoa!" And what else did I do? Oh, I was probably maybe a sophomore in school, and Mom and Dad had gone to Lexington to the funeral home. We weren't supposed to leave home while they were gone. So anyhow, my friends came by and said, "Let's go swimming at Red Bridge," which was about 15 miles from home. So I said, "I can't." Mom and Dad said, "Oh, we'll be back before they get back," they said. So I go with them, and when I got back, Mom and Dad had been home about a half an hour. And I walked in, and Dad said, "Margaret, where have you been?" And I thought it'd be better if I hadn't been far from home, so there was this little creek about 2 miles from home, Bailey's Mill. And I said, "Oh, we went down to Bailey's Mill." And Dad said, "That's the first time I ever heard of anybody swimming in a dry creek. That creek's been dry for 3 weeks." And he just turned around and got in bed. Never said another word.
Describe some of your school experiences.
There were a lot of them, but one in particular, we had this math teacher named Ms. Christopher. I think 5 or 6 or 7 of us all had Ms. Christopher as a math teacher, but Ms. Christopher was a good math teacher. She knew her math, but she couldn't teach it. And my dad was a whole lot better at math than she was, and he could teach it. But Ms. Christopher and I fought every day. She'd send me to the office, and the principal would look up and say, "Well, what have you and Ms. Christopher been fighting about today?" And he'd have me do some filing and put me to work in the office. So then there were a lot of other things I did, but the Lord, I can't remember some of them. One, this guy, Haney Johnson, was a classmate of mine, and we were on the 3rd floor, and the cafeteria was in the basement. And when the bell rang for lunch, well, Haney'd get on the banister and ride down, and I'd take the steps 3 and 4 at a time. And I could beat him as we went around the corner. We raced every day to the lunch line to see who could get there first.
How old were you?
Oh, 13 or 14. So, I don't know how I ever made it through school, but
here's a good one. Share a story about a time you got into some trouble, because you haven't done that yet.
Well, let me see, what trouble did I get into? About 2 weeks before graduation, I almost got expelled from school for fighting. This girl called me a liar, and I belted her one. And so they called us to the office and said that since it was so close to graduation, if we just apologize, that we could go on back to class. Well, she apologized, and she wasn't any more sorry than I was, but I didn't apologize. And they said, "You mean that you'd rather be expelled than to apologize?" And I said, "No, I'd rather graduate. And if it takes an apology for me to graduate, I'll apologize. But before I do, I want each one of you to know it's be a barefaced lie." So they just sat there and just looked at each other. Finally, they looked at me and said, "Go on back to class." That was one of the times I got in trouble. I probably got in trouble a lot of other times.
Tell me what faith looked like in your family.
We didn't go to church a lot because we lived about 13 miles from town, and most of the time we didn't have a car to go in, and so on. But we prayed every day. My mother and father taught us by example, as well as many other people that I encountered that saw how they lived and so on. So faith was a big thing in our family. Taking care of other people was the main thing. It was kindness and taking care of other people. So to me, that's what faith looked like. Nobody ever came to our house that wasn't fed, or if there weren't enough beds, they at least could sleep on the floor or something. So that was our faith.
Did your parents grow up Catholic?
Yeah, they both grew up Catholic, and of course we were all raised Catholic. Yeah.
What was your favorite food or meal growing up?
Hot dogs. I liked hot dogs. And mush. Yeah. I liked hot dogs and mush. Cornmeal mush. I can't remember. Grits. I think they call it probably grits today.
What do you want us to know about your parents?
My parents they gave me and all the other family unconditional love. My mother had nothing bad to say about anybody. My mother was a saint, really. She played piano for silent movies for about 10 years before she married. And then she also, well, I guess that's what Mama did. But Dad had a little bit of devil in him. But he was a very, very good man, had a lot of patience, and raising 10 kids, sending 10 kids through high school, and he wouldn't have it any other way. I had a sister who quit. My sister Betty quit high school 3 or 4 times, and she'd come home and say, "Daddy, I quit school today." And he'd say, "You did?" Wouldn't say any more. The next morning he'd say, "Betty, time to get up for school." "I quit yesterday." He'd say, "I know, honey, but you're going to enroll again today." So he'd get on his horse and ride to school, make sure she got enrolled back in school that day.
What else do you want us to know about your parents?
All of my ancestors are Irish. My paternal grandmother came from Ireland when she was 16. My maternal grandfather was a blacksmith, and he shot a lot of the Kentucky Derby winners. All 4 of E.R. Bradley's Kentucky Derby winners he shot. And he also taught Arthur Murray dancing. They all lived in Lexington, Kentucky. Of course, I grew up in Frankfort, or Franklin County, Kentucky.
So how often did you see them growing up?
The grandparents? Mm-hmm. Not very often, because, like I said, we didn't have vehicles to travel in. We were just coming out of the Depression, the 1929 Depression. Well, I guess it's about 6 years prior to that, the 1929 Depression, before I was born. But still, we didn't have a lot of things. When you have that many kids, and it takes a lot to take care of them. So we got places. The neighbor went with the neighbors, or once in a while somebody'd have a car.
So what do you remember, and what should we know about your grandparents other than what you shared? Maybe you could share some memories of the times you were around them.
Well, both my grandfathers, one grandfather was dead before I was born. Died before I was born. The other grandfather died when I was 6. So I really have no memories of either one of those. My mother's mother was a lot like my mother. She had a lot of the same characteristics as Mama did. My father's mother died when he was 5 years old, so I never knew her. But his his stepmother, which is everything a mother could be. She was just a very giving, loving person. I don't have a lot of memories of them because of the fact that I wasn't with them a lot, And when I was, there were so many other people around. Something else was always going on,
All right, Grandma. Share some of your love stories. Your first date, first kiss, engagement, or proposal, or all of it.
Well, some of my love stories. I had probably 15 or 20 boyfriends, I don't remember, and I don't know who I kissed first. I don't remember who my first date was. I started dating when I was a freshman in high school. And like I said, I dated several guys. Usually they were 3 or 4 years older than me. None of them, well, there was one guy who's about a year older than me. But, and then as far as my love that I was with for 49 years, give or take, the first date I had with him, he didn't ask me to marry him first date, but he asked me if a Baptist could marry a Catholic on the first date. And we dated from March till, I guess in December we got engaged. Married and had 5 kids.
Was there a proposal or anything you remember about the engagement?
Nothing out of the ordinary that I can remember. Just I guess during the course of conversation he gave me a ring. I don't remember.
How did your life change when you had kids?
Well, my kids came pretty fast. And I kept them fed and clothed, and that's about all and bathed, and that's about all I could fit in a day. Sometimes I'd have three kids in diapers at a time. When I was pregnant the 4th time, I was in a car wreck and broke my leg. So I was on crutches 6 months of that pregnancy. We lived in 3 different states, so we did quite a bit of traveling. I guess the normal things you do with kids. Had a house full of babies and then a house full of teenagers, and then they were all gone.
What would you want me to pass on to my grandchildren?
To love each other and to do the best they could to become informed citizens and stand up for what they believe in.
Describe your jobs that you've made money doing.
I guess my first job making money doing was on the farm, raising cattle and tobacco and picking tomatoes and so forth. Sold the tomatoes at a tomato station. That would be the first job that I had. And then I went to work at the hospital, and I worked in several different departments at the hospital for about 7 years. And then, of course, I have had income tax accounting and income tax business that I've had for 40 some years, probably 45 years now. Till present time, and I'm going to retire one of these days.
How did you get into the tax business?
The Uncle Wiggily system. A lot of people don't know what Uncle Wiggily is, but it's a game that you played, and it's something similar to Monopoly. You draw a card, and it would tell you to go to the little red house on the corner, and then when you drew another card, it would tell you to go someplace else. So you just drew your cards and did what it told you to. My sister Betty worked for the state in the Department of Revenue, and she was doing our taxes. And I said, Betty, that doesn't look that hard. She said, it didn't. I said, you want to learn? And I said, I don't have time to go to school. The kids were real little. And she said, you don't have to go to school. She said, if you're willing to read, I can get you all the things that you need to teach yourself. So I guess I could say I was self-taught. Yeah. And there were times I just about had most of the manuals memorized. So that's how I got into the tax business.
Tell me whatever you want to about being married.
Well, I married the same man twice. We were married for 49 years, give or take. We had, as all couples do, we had a lot of ups and downs. Takes a lot of tolerance and a lot of patience to be married, because you have to do a give and take situation for each other.
What advice would you give to your grandkids and great-grandkids about marriage? Because some of them are married or getting married.
Try to get to know each other as well as you can before you're married, and try to discuss as many things as you possibly can. Try maybe to be on the same page on at least some of the things. I wouldn't say to everybody think alike, because then one's just not thinking if everybody thinks alike, So don't just give up on the things. You have to keep on trying.
All right, share your thoughts on major world events that you've lived through.
Well, of course, I was real young when the Second World War, but I remember the Korean War real well, and a lot of my friends and family were in the Korean War and very affected by it. Then we had the Bay of Pigs in 1960 with Cuba, and at that time we didn't know what was going to happen. Of course, they talked about atomic bombs and so on, and one thing I thought was how young my children were, and if something happened, they really hadn't had a chance to live. And then the Vietnam War came along, and it was terrible. Most wars are terrible. Most wars there's a way around them for most wars. I've lived through how many presidencies? I don't remember how many presidencies I've lived through. Some have been good, some have been not so good. But as in anything in life, I guess everything can be improved on.
So the wars were really memorable and really hard, bad times. But what about, are there any things you've lived through or seen come to be during your lifetime that you think are good?
Yeah, I think the television is something that was invented, I guess, after I was born. The television, the telephone, the better highways, electricity and your utilities have been vastly improved on. I'm drawing a blank on most other things.
You've seen a huge shift in technology in your lifetime.
Yeah.
Just overall. I mean, you mentioned TV and phones, but you've seen computers, and that's changed the way that
right.
You actually live every day.
Some of that's good, and some of that's not so good. Because I think that, in particular, the way things are now, people don't communicate. They use objects to communicate with instead of having face-to-face conversations or sitting down and talking things out. They You can often go into a place and there'll be 4 people sitting at a table, and all 4 of them are on their cell phones and not paying any attention to the other people around them, and I don't think that's good. I think you lose contact with people and so on with that. Everything becomes automated, and it doesn't come from the heart.
What did your day look like as a kid versus what you think a kid's day looks like today?
When I was a kid growing up, I was 11 years old when we got electricity. We didn't have running water. We had an outdoor toilet. We had to walk a good distance to get to the store or to school or wherever we went. And back then we thought that was bad. But as one of my brothers and I were talking just a few years ago, when we were growing up, we didn't have anything, but we had it all. Because we had a mother and father who would swim the deepest ocean, climb the highest mountain for us for anything. So, and you don't replace those things with inanimate objects.
What do you want to be when you grow up right now?
Oh, Lord. What do I want to be? Probably, if I were probably a lawyer.
Kind of lawyer.
Or something. I don't know. Probably anything came down the pike, I guess. Or I guess you'd have to specialize in something. I don't know.
Why do you want to be a lawyer, of all things?
I guess because I like to argue. That's where Bob got his from. Was
Tell me a story about a person who has had a positive impact on your life.
Well, what comes to my mind all the time is my mother and father. They loved us unconditionally. Mom only saw the good in people. Dad would do anything for anybody at any time. And they gave when they didn't have anything to give. So what more can you ask for? I think when you had parents like my parents, you didn't have to want for much else. And as far as anybody else making a big, impact on my life, probably not. I mean, my mother and father. My father was one of these people, if he'd say to you, "You need to do this," and you'd say, "I've already done that, Dad," and he'd say, "Today." If you hadn't done it today, he didn't want to hear that you couldn't do it. You had to try it over and over again, I'm going back here a bit, but one of the funniest things that happened to me when I was a teenager, I was dating this one guy that was working on a road there by our house. And he had a friend named Tommy McCone. Well, this one morning, I was staying all night with this girlfriend of mine, and she and I decided we'd miss the bus on purpose so that we could catch a ride with Tommy to school. And I was about 15, and Tommy was probably 27 or 8, and I thought it was unusual that he hadn't married. And I said, "Tommy, how come you've never married?" And he said, he was from Pikeville. He said, "Well, I had a girlfriend one time, but she didn't like my hound dogs and my game roosters, so I just said to hell with her." That's always stuck with me.
there anything, I don't know if you wrote any of your own questions, but is there anything else you wanted to share today?
No, nothing I know of. No.
All right. Thank you, Grandma.
You're welcome, and thank you.